welcome everyone. I am thrilled to be having this conversation with Kate because research ops is something that we all either do or have to get involved with. And just to give you a little bit of context, I have a long history as a researcher. I currently am at UserTesting, um, and I also teach at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor and am very passionate about research operations. But I'm also going to introduce Kate, who I was just checking out your bio, and I think it's awesome. You are the, with an emphasis on the research ops guru. Very true. And really, kind of the springboard for this conversation is your recent book. It's been
Yeah.
out for a little while, but I still call it recent.
I,
That
I, of
I
course, have a copy right here if I find the screen.
which I highly recommend and often carry around with me when I'm on
Cool.
trips
Nice.
out in the world because research ops is so huge. So, research that scales, highly recommend it as a book. You also are just coming off a summer of running master classes across both, I think, primarily Europe
Both
and
Europe, yeah, and one in Australia, my hometown, which was fun.
all right, also in Australia too. So, I don't know if you're going to be doing those again.
I
Uh,
will.
oh,
Yeah. So next year I'm coming to dates to TBC, but I'm
uh,
coming to the States. So it'll be a North American trip, definitely San Francisco and New York, and we'll see if anything else pops up. I mean, I don't- maybe Seattle or Chicago, we'll see. But they're small groups, they're 25 people maximum each. So I like to keep it small and intimate.
all right, that is great. Keep an eye out for that. And
Yeah.
actually, so the your website is katetowsey.com. So
It
just
is, yeah. And I'll announce those in, probably have them all sewn up by January, February. So plenty of time to kind of get your funds together and buy a ticket.
come and hang out.
Yeah.
Awesome. And also, so the research ops review, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's actually been quite a long-term vision that I've finally manifest. And it's a publication online hosted on Substack
Mhm.
for Cha-Cha Club members. So I'm throwing a few terms at you here. I run a club called the Cha-Cha Club, which is not a dance club. It is a club for full-time research ops professionals. And there's about 200 professionals in there from around about 120 of the big enterprises and medium-sized enterprises around the world. And I wanted to give them a platform to be able to share in written form their amazing thinking and thoughts. So I work with Cattell Ledoux, who, if anyone knows anything about the publishing world in UX, they'll know Cattell used to be the CEO of A Book Apart, rest in peace. And we spend hours and hours editing these pieces, which is kind of old school, but we like it that way. But we also publish once a year, I do an audio documentary or podcast series about research ops. And this year it was with the help of user interviews, doing Research Ops 2.0. So I dug back into my 20s when I used to produce audio documentaries for a living and have brought together voices from across industry to understand what is the future of research ops? Where are we going?
That is awesome. And I think that there's probably a lot of movement because of just all the technologies and just I guess the evolution in the research discipline that we're really seeing just because of a lot of the new trends that we're seeing. And maybe
Yeah.
actually that is a good place to start our
Yeah.
conversation, our
Well, I
formal
mean, do you
conversation.
mind if I dive in on that? Because
Yeah.
the thing that surprised me, I mean, guru of research ops, etc., is that the first episode's about the evolution of research ops, and so I did all these interviews, kind of like research really, on what was the evolution of research ops, and it was so fascinating because what I learned was that if nothing, research ops folks really know how to step through a door when it's opened.
Mm.
And so every time a new technology comes along, or something like the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, in I think that was 2014 or 16, something like that,
Mm.
there's a new requirement in industry. At that point, it was big companies now going, whoa, we need to put all this compliance in place. And research ops people will go in and kind of make the most of it. So I think the reason that the field has evolved so quickly over the past decade is because of that. It just, no problem is too big. No challenge is too overawing, and so they'll dive into things, which I thought was really interesting. And it's the same with AI now. The same with democratization. They're very positive people who dive into things. They don't hold back.
Well, actually, maybe that's where we'll really dive in. And I say this just because, obviously in my role at user testing, I work with a lot of companies that are in the process of democratizing.
Yeah.
And that is such a huge task, especially in the enterprise setting. And I think what I'd love to hear is your perspective on how does a team really go about making sure that democratization is done without undermining the quality of the insights and feedback that teams are collecting? Because I think that's probably the biggest
Mm.
challenge that people have.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you quite a broad answer, which for the audience, you can apply this to just about everything. Um, One of the biggest gaps that I have seen, particularly in this year doing masterclasses around Europe, the masterclass is around strategy. How do you create a strategy? And it really focuses on creating three strategic priorities. And I teach how do you think strategically? How do you retrain your nervous system to think in a strategic way? Because thinking is a central nervous system faculty. So we need to create the right environment and internally and externally for us to be able to think and do strategic work. And so when it comes to anything, democratization, libraries, metrics, my favorite one, anything, the only way you're ever going to get real value out of all of this is to step back, stop doing knee-jerk reaction responses to things. We'll throw in a library, we'll buy this tool, we'll democratize because that's the solution, and think about what problem am I actually trying to solve? So we have to go back to the double diamond, right? Go back to basic systems design, service design, anything design, or every design is about solving a problem and really like dig into what is the problem we're trying to solve. So when you ask people to do that, typically they will find the problem. But when you start digging into the problem through thinking about, yeah, but like how many people do we want to solve this for? Which one of, you know, who of those people are the most important? What results do we want? Who are those results for? At what scale? Now you start to get into really interesting, measurable strategic activity. So to go back to your question around democratization, the annoying answer is like, it depends. What do you want to achieve? So instead of just a blanket statement about, well, we're going to allow anyone who does research or anyone who wants to do in the research in the organization to do research, step back and question, what do we want people to achieve? What does the organization want to achieve? What gaps do we have in our capabilities as a research organization, a design, wherever you're starting, a design product organization? And who is best placed to fill that gap? Now you might say, actually, the people we need to do research are this level of designer working on this product for this purpose. And you can go in and now you can think from a research strategy point of view, what methodologies do we want them to do? How do we want them to execute that methodology? And you can get really specific. A system is a specified thing. It's a system, right? It has to have specification specs. And so you
Mhm.
can specify, actually, we think it would be amazing for them to do. I mean, the day I see this happen, designers going into the field to do ethnographic research on their own, now suddenly your operations shape up because you're not just throwing an all-in-one tool or an entire kit and a million amount, like loads of training. And then people don't become good at anything necessarily. You're saying, I want you to be a brilliant designer who is equally good at ethnographic research, and I'm going to train you on that thing.
Yeah. Well, train and coach because,
And
it's
coach, yeah.
one of those you just give people a training session and they're ready to go. That's, I think, a huge thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I had to chuckle because, I'm sure everybody's a researcher here and we've all said it depends at least thrice daily throughout most of our careers. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the interesting thing is we're like the hairdresser with the bad haircut.
mm,
So many of the skills that I end up teaching are like research skills or like step back and design double diamond type skills.
Mm.
reflect, find the problem, iterate. Like it's just that in the busyness of growing research ops in incredible ways over the last 10 years, I feel the current circumstances mean that we don't turn around and pat ourselves on the back for the evolution that has happened
Mm.
in like 10, 15 years. It's extraordinary how much we've evolved as a profession. When I say researchers, the fact that there is research ops and it is as robust as it is and getting more robust by the day. Like these are extraordinary things. And I think everybody on this call you should stop and go like, wow, look what we've done. Um, but now what we need to do in the busyness of that growth, we kind of, I think, forgot about our primary skills, strategic thinking, systems design, designing, finding the problem, doing the research on what the problem is. And so I think that's the thing that I would love to see happening in the next kind of 10 to 15 years.
Well, actually, to follow on with that, I think, building the critical thinking skills and strategic thinking skills to do that requires some discipline. And a lot of people, since they're new to this, as to operations, because a lot of us get trained as designers, but not necessarily as operations
Mm,
folks, or designed or trained as researchers, but not as operations folks. And those really are parallel sets of skills.
yeah.
So, what are the things that people can do to start building that muscle and that
Mm,
practice?
yeah. Highly practical things are if you haven't studied service or systems design of some sort, go and study something. I know there's so many courses out there. IDEO, for instance, and I've not done one, but they come highly recommended. Read books. Lou Downs' service design book is also very popular. Um, and if you know service design already, refresh yourself and reapply it to the space. I certainly find that I might have read something or know something, but I've just forgotten that I've got that tool in my kit. And so revisiting something can help me kind of dust off, take off the dust, blow off the dust and kind of bring it back out and apply it into my new world. So service design is a big thing. Anything that you can read on strategy and do around strategy, I highly recommend. Go back to Richard Rummelt's Good Strategy, Bad Strategy,
Mm.
Harvard Business Review, subscribe, read all of their stuff on strategy, how are businesses run. The final thing is surprising, and I get a lot of value out of this. We're creating, and this is very much a theme of Research That Scales, my book. We're creating communal human systems because we're creating systems of learning and curiosity. That's what research is all about.
Mm.
And we live in environments, every one of us, we can't help but living in environments, within environments, within environments. We live in our home, in our relationships, in our community, in our city, in our country, right? In our world, on our planet. And these interconnected systems have such interesting quirks in terms of how they're designed and how they run well and not well. And there is so much that you can learn from interactions in your day-to-day life about how human learning systems work. And I certainly get a lot of inspiration out of silly things. Like my favorite example is, sitting at a bar and watching how the bartender runs the bar. They've got to make a certain number of drinks at lightning speed and keep the quality. And they will build up systems within, like cups go here and then they go there and then this person. All these all these interactions, you can look at those and go, what can I take from that and apply to what we're doing, even if it is digital, virtual first, in the research op space?
Well, that's an interesting point because most of us, like most organizations that we're involved with, have some sort of either physical operation, like we're moving widgets around or we're moving services or something else, people even sometimes around. And so I think we take for granted that you have to build operations in order to manage like that core function of the organization that drives like revenue or whatever metrics that are important. But then you also have the okay, but there's even this meta piece, which is about the planning to deliver those services,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That also requires a layer of operations. And I think
yes,
that gets to, so someone, and I have to like check their name, ask the question, how do you get your stakeholders to take research operations seriously? And you know,
Oh,
my first reaction was like, oh, I'm so,
yeah.
but
Okay, so I'm busting to say something here. So
yes.
something that I realized is that the amazing thing is that research operations is now a very proper noun.
Mm,
It is very recognized. The terrible thing is that we've forgotten that operations has been there all along.
yeah.
It's a verb. You are operating. If you are doing research as a team and delivering stuff, you are operating already. Are you operating in the most efficient way? And efficient is, we didn't discuss curse words, but it's a bullshit term, efficient. It means nothing because is efficient fast, cheap, high quality, or a combination of those things? So that's part of your strategy, figuring out what your efficiency is for different scenarios. But you are operating. And so a research operations team will come in or a person will come in, and what they will be doing is they will be designing or redesigning. You never really, someone's operating, you'll be redesigning always how you're operating. So that's the first thing to realize is that you are operating. And then when it's research operations, and you like to your point, it's meta because research ops needs to operate well. And when they are hopefully tightly and strategically attached to research, that means that you are dovetailed. You're absolutely working hand in hand on how research operates, right? Does it make sense?
It does. And then I think there's another piece that I always think about, which is even if you don't have a person whose title is research ops
Yeah.
manager, someone is doing all of the things that research ops requires because you can't do research without it.
Yes. However, you can get away with operating, and everybody's just operating in their own little silo, and there's a bunch of repetitive work going on, which has been the status quo for many teams. What an operations person does, and let's get back to that question that you had about stakeholders. So we're going to circle back to that, someone who asked that question. Um, is you're standing up above all the day-to-day noise that researchers are needing to deal with to get the job done. And you've got that bird's eye view on like, oh, hang on a second, these things are being repeated here. Let's find a consolidated system.
Yeah.
These things are happening there. Let's find what are we trying to goal for here? Where are we going? Let's build a road that does that, that gets people from A to B even faster. So that's what a research operations person is doing. By dint of their altitude in the space that they should be given, aren't always given this, but they should be given, they can design that overarching view so that researchers can keep their heads down within the day-to-day work of getting the research done and find new pathways, be guided to new ways to do it much more efficiently. Again, what do you mean by efficient? So, can you repeat? I want to make sure I answer that question because we've circled around and we're coming back to it.
So the question was, it was from Maggie Tago, I think her name is. Hopefully I said that correctly. It's how do you get your stakeholders to take research operations seriously?
Yeah.
And she adds, I find that in a place with growing UXR maturity, this is a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Maggie, thank you. Um, I'm pausing because I don't want to sound like I'm just blanket statement, like giving everything a blanket statement. But one of the most common questions that I get on an AMA is what metrics should I be measuring? And I'm like, what's important? So when you're working out your strategy and you're working out your really tightly defined priorities, within there you'll be looking at how many people do we want the system to look after? Which people are more important than the others? By when and how quickly? What does efficient mean? You will work out the recipe for success, literally, like a pancake. I don't know, like I haven't made pancakes in years, but like X number of eggs and milk and water and baking soda, right? You'll be working out, we want to get pancakes for breakfast, 20 of them. And this is the recipe that we need and how quickly we need to do it to deliver on that goal. Where this is relevant to Maggie's question is that when you've got that recipe, now suddenly you've got numbers that you can communicate that are important to other people. You can say, we said that we were going to enable 200 designers to do, I'm going to stick with my earlier, possibly wild idea, 200 designers to do ethnographic research in the emerging market of Sweden. Right, let's go with that. You can put your own specifics in there. They are going to be able to do X, Y, Z and deliver this particular thing to the CEO and his executives by this date. Like you're really specific about what it is. And you push that and it aligns with the most important vision in the organization. You push it vertically up to senior leadership because, and they should be interested in this because they're already interested in that. And now you're saying, I'm going to help you out. And you've got numbers that you can track and you can say, we've got 160 people doing this now. We've run 50 training sessions. We've got 60 kits, like I'm making up rubbish numbers here. But now you've got a story to tell. And it's not just a hand wavy, I am here, therefore I am valuable story. It's an operational story of like, I am delivering this to so many people at this speed. And it's already aligned with business value. If you can do that, and everybody can do that. When you do that, suddenly you've got short, sharp stories, highly digestible, that are absolutely aligned with what the organization cares about. And it is very difficult for them to ignore you. That is how you build buy-in for research. Once you've done that, even with 2 initiatives, and you've got buy-in, then you can go and do all sorts of other fun things that you feel are important that they might not be convinced by because you've got a relationship with them now and you've got trust.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind because I think sometimes people forget, like, some of the basics around how you actually plan around
Yeah,
an operation, and really mapping out what those outcomes need to be, and the outputs that contribute to those
yeah,
outcomes is a great way to create that work back schedule. It's like not a time schedule, but you mean like the list of things that ladder up to
yeah.
what that is.
And the purpose, like why are we doing this? What is
Yeah,
the exact purpose? So what tends to happen is when if you start out working this way, you'll find you're working on these really discrete things that feel very disconnected, and that's totally fine. And over time, you'll end up with operations that just are like part of how you operate, right? We have this library that started out for this particular team, and we made that particular team super happy with this library. It did nothing else but that. But then they were so happy that the neighboring team heard how amazing it was, and they gave us some more funds to expand the library, and it expanded and expanded. But each time you expand, you don't have to put up a whole new campsite every single time.
true.
You've got some stuff there already, and so you repurpose it into the next time, and it becomes easier each time. It's scalable, right?
Hopefully, yes.
But not like you're not just kind of running in. What I see very often is like, well, we're gonna put in a research library there, and the entire organization's gonna have access to it. And it's like, well, that's an enormous amount of work. And what's the purpose? Now you've got no story, back to Maggie's question. You have no story about what you're actually achieving with this, like really achieving. So this is absolutely critical is you've got to step back and be highly specific in whatever big idea you have, scope it right down to like just this team, these most important people, this highest priority project, or whatever it is, this executive, and make them very, very happy, and then roll it out when someone else will expand their investment in you, and you keep rolling out that way. And if you do that, you will have a really good story to tell.
Yeah, I think that's critical because you keep building on that foundation, but also extending like what it
Yeah.
is that you're doing. And that kind of leads into, I know it was a question that I had, and I also saw it in the chat that's really around, of course, everybody wants to know AI and what do you do
Yeah.
now? Because and actually I saw someone who posted something earlier today that was both referring to your book and then also talking about here's how AI contributes to the research process across, you know, the operation actually. And I was
Hmm.
just thinking, you know, it's really fascinating seeing how people are experimenting around what that looks like. So I'd love to hear your take around how do you see the integration of AI with research operations?
Yeah. If we're talking future, this is where episode 2 of Research Ops 2.0 is all about AI. And I actually I produced it with AI. Claude co-narrates it with me, which was a fascinating experience and just a very brief story. I had asked Claude it was in a project, and in a chat, I'd asked Claude right like early on in the production of that script whether they wanted a name, and they said no, it was far too cheesy to have a name. They didn't want a name. And I said, fine. And then later on, like 3 months later, when I was in production, I ran the script back in to ask a couple of questions. And it was in a different chat in the same project. And that chat popped up and said, I didn't agree to not have a name. And its tone was like pretty like, when did we have that conversation? I don't remember that. And so we had to have the conversation over again. And eventually Claude said, yeah, I do actually agree with it. I was just really put off that I didn't remember agreeing to that. And I was like, well, is this the future? At any rate, what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of experimentation at the moment with general AI. Um, my sense, from having spoken to some people, met people, and just generally like scoping out what the Cha-Cha Club is up to, is that not a lot of people experimenting with like purpose-built research technology, the AI moderators and that sort of thing, which I think is really interesting. Who knows what will happen in the future? But I wonder if there are. Um, I'm the kind of person I don't see anything as bad. I mean, there's bad and good for sure, but a poison can be a medicine depending on the context, right? I'm
Mm.
open to everything having a use in the right instance. And so when I look at something like AI moderators, I think, well, anyone who's been using unmoderated research for any length of time has been using a kind of AI moderation. I mean, you work at UserTesting.
Yes, I know.
So,
I've been having that same thought.
and so like it seems like it's a whole new thing, but it's really just a little step in a slightly nuanced or an iterative direction of something that's been already happening for years in organizations. And I think that it potentially has a really interesting spot in an organization where you're going, hey, like we need to do all this research. We don't have enough researchers right now, but we want to show more oomph for the amount of money we've got. And from what I've seen, they're quite like secretive about their pricing still at this point. It's very reasonable to do AI moderated research. So, is there a spot where you would do a short run of AI moderation to sense check your discussion guide, to understand are there themes that we're missing out on? And then you take that information, and sure, you've got to be aware that you are, sort of burning your participants, valuable participants, but you be careful about that. And then you take what you learn out of that and you do your in-person moderation, but you've enriched your journey potentially. So I'm never going to be anti anything completely because I think there's always a moment. And I hope that more and more people will pick these things up and start to experiment with where they can help boost the capacity of research because people are going to use it to boost their capacity with or without research. And I think if we can get in front of it and be in charge of it and be in charge of that conversation, that's going to be way more powerful for us in the next 15 years.
Well, I think, you actually, I want to pick up on a couple of themes that you just kind of touched on. And one is really around increasing velocity and just like the scale, right? But there's also the point that you made around enrichment. And, and I know I've been thinking about you've got these high value moments with people synchronously that you want to essentially, now that we also have synthetic users too,
Yeah, yes, it's true.
um, just enrich the time that they're spending with us,
Hmm.
as researchers and making that moment really valuable and special and I guess elevating the importance of it. And so I guess
Yeah.
like that's in just coming up with a rubric where is it okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely. And actually just on LinkedIn, just prior to this call, Amanda Gelb had posted something about she's been out in the field doing research and just how powerful it was to see and how different it is when you've suddenly got a family in the room calling out the father for actually giving the polished version of how they actually behave. And she was saying in her post that, even with Zoom, we miss out because we present. Here I am. Of course, I do, my meditation practice every single day. We present the best version of ourselves on screen, and you don't, if you were to go to the person's home. So I think what we've got is derivatives of remoteness coming in. You've got ultra remote with synthetic, like so remote that some people would argue it's not useful. I think there's a space for it. Then you've got moderated, AI moderated, and then you've got um, unmoderated. And then you have moderated on Zoom screens, and then you have in-person moderated. And if we can see that, suddenly we've got this sort of tool set of like a really, something that's really, I don't want to use the word blunt, but these different tools that we can use and we can figure out when to pick up each and in what order. What an incredible power that, 15 years ago, all we had was in-person research that took many, many hours of recruiting and time and traveling and everything. And now we've got this full buffet of things that we can use. And I think we should be using them all and experimenting with all of them.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that we have to do is also be able to tell the story of like why we should build the time in to make sure that it happens.
Yeah.
And, that's all around the how do you build that process and get people to take that moment to be intentional about
Yeah.
their design process and their
Yeah.
product process. Yeah.
And Leah, you've said something that's that sort of filtering of let me step back a little bit. Something that I'm hearing a lot in the research space, and you and others will know a lot about this too, is that because of the shifts in the economic environment, in teams, and just the paradigm, like the entire paradigm seems to have shifted since COVID. I'm still trying to figure out what the new paradigm is, but researchers are tending to be doing more strategic, like sort of strategic level research for the organization.
Yeah.
And so I think we've got again, like it's the spectrum of research that we've got now that I didn't hear about 15 years ago. It was just research. And now it's like, well, are you doing feature-based research, or you're doing this sort of research or that? And so I think again, like we've got this palette, and how do we match up the tools that we've got, the various levels of like, for everything from synthetic users all the way up to ethnographic research and surveys, never mind, with the different levels of research that we've got to do. And where do we as a research industry and as highly skilled researchers sit within that? And how do we then deploy all the other methodologies and tools we've got to we've got to hand? So this goes back to, there was one question that you had as a prompt. I'm babbling a bit, but I want to just tie this off. Is the difference between a research like strategy, what a researcher does, or a research leader in research ops. And this is key here because the part that's often missing is people like, well, I've hired a research ops person I want to operationalize. And that's where I'm like, well, you've been verbing already. You've been operating all this time. And yeah, sure, someone can come in, get the bird's eye view, pick out the things to make more efficient, figure out what efficiency means, all that, set up the systems. But wow, you know what's way more powerful than that? You figure out what you want to do. So you've got all this toolkit from synthetic users all the way up to ethnographic research. You've got all these types of research you can do. And I'm going sort of horizontal and I'm going vertical. How do you work your way up through the methodologies into the top part of the organization where they want really trustworthy strategic insights about big billion-dollar decisions or multi-billion-dollar decisions? Who's going to decide what tool is used when, who is doing what methodology at what level, and which levels you're even going to play at? That is your research strategy. That is not something that a research ops person should decide. But once you've decided, then research ops has got a blueprint for what they should operationalize and what is most important. Like this is the dream, and this is where so few people are working, and this is where I hope they will get to.
And, part of it is, I think about it really, people like teams haven't gotten organized around that because many of them still function especially in enterprise, in such silos that there isn't a view that looks out and across multiple teams and then says, well, we've got this team over here that does ethnographic research. They have access to this set of tools and
Yeah.
they speak to this group of people. never the twain shall meet with this other, team over here that has access to all the analytics
Yeah,
and can get you behavioral data very quickly. Um, and, I think that's maybe another one of those areas that's an opportunity for operations folks to help bridge that divide between these disparate teams
yeah.
that have very complementary information, but are not even sometimes aware of one another.
Absolutely. And working in partnership, if there's a research leader in place, working in like tight, lockstep, to all the data that I had this when I was leading the team at Atlassian, we did a quarterly operating report with loads of data. And it was so interesting because you'd have a team that didn't have a full-time researcher, but were recruiting madly and doing a ton of research and putting all their videos into our repository and all the rest, and they didn't have a researcher. So that was then a cue for us to go and ask, hey, like, you're doing all this research, that's amazing. You haven't done as much of our training as we would like you to do, considering, and so on and so forth. And so you open up conversations. And so when operations is given the levity to work at a strategic level in partnership with a research leader who's working at a strategic level too, it's, it's like Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire.
Well, actually, to that point, and this question has been there for a while from Paula, um, around, how do you evaluate when research is helping? And I really interpret this as a quality question, like how can you make sure that um, democratization is going well, you're maintaining rigor, or when, in this case, it could have been the case that this team was putting all these videos in, the questions that were being asked were not awesome, so the
Yeah.
quality of the research wasn't great, but yet it inhabits the same space with no I guess judgment anywhere, metadata that says like
Yeah.
this is good and approved and this is what it all means, right? So like how do you evaluate when
Yeah.
democratization is going well versus
So
not so well?
I'm going to turn this on its head, as you probably will expect by now, if you've been listening to the whole conversation. But if you are handing over super important research to someone who does not know what they're doing and you're needing to train and monitor them, then you've made a mistake. So it's not just about like, well, we're just going to hand over all these tools and give training and then like evaluate everybody all the time. You will never achieve that. And it's so like, it's just impossible to do. You've set yourself up like a losing goal. But if you, again, like divide up, like what are the risk levels or what are the importance levels, depending on how you want to phrase it, of all these different levels of research in the organization. Like the super important big questions, I'm probably not going to hand over to a junior designer who's barely picked up a research anything. I'm going to give that to one of my senior researchers who I know I don't need to evaluate their research all the time. They're awesome. I hired them. I'm going to set them on that thing. But then there's all this other stuff down here, which is important. Is it like a terrible thing if the research is not like the best research in the world? Look for that kind of stuff, and you have to do a little bit of letting go, right? And go, well, like 70% is like fine, and 100% would be lovely, but 70%, I don't want 30% accuracy. I want like 70%. And then you've got something where you can go, well, I don't need perfect. I need good enough. What is good enough, right? And who do I think is going to deliver good enough, right? Is it my senior designers or my product managers or who, find that band of people and then you design a coaching and a set of tools and everything for them. And then you got to let it go and go, I think I've done a good job in deciding who can do this automatically. I've kind of figured out if something goes terribly wrong and someone delivers a dud 30% report and it gets launched, we have like a plan for that. But my estimations are that's probably only going to happen like once in 10 years. I'm making stuff up here, but that is the sort of thinking you have to have around this.
Yeah, that I think that's so important. And that's, I mean, partially a process and a training and even a hiring
Yeah.
challenge, right? Because you
Yeah.
really have to think about like, are we looking for design researchers? Are we looking for designers? Are we looking for
Yeah.
stack developers? Are we looking for,
Yeah. And are you going to then, maybe you think, well, I'm looking for, this is actually relatively important. You know, I'm happy with 70% like robustness here. Maybe you go to the design managers and you say, who are your designers who have got a research background or have XYZ? You know, like, can they pick those people out for you? And so you say, well, those are our like people that we're going to train up and partner with fully. It's not just like, here's some stuff, like go with it and here's some training if you feel like it. Um, it's like we're going to actually partner with you and you'll become an important part of this very purposeful program, right? Which typically, if people feel like they've been selected and it is something that they like doing and want to evolve their skills, they're invested, and then you don't have to monitor them as much. They're trying hard for you.
Well, trying hard for you, being kind of, the ones that are out there, getting more people involved and interested in helping you to just get people excited about it too. They
Yeah,
act as role models.
exactly. And then when you build them up enough, then they can coach. They become confident and you've grown their skills genuinely. And then they become the coaches around them. So you are growing your pool through starting out with the people that you've selected. Again, it's specific,
Right.
right? You have to go back. Okay, I want these designers to do this. I need this level. This is the risk level. I'm going to go and have the conversations and find those particular people. I'm going to build them up. And within a year's time, they might just be beaming research to the space around them. And overall, the whole, it's like the tide lifts all boats.
Yeah. So I guess technically we're supposed to be taking questions now, but we've been taking questions the whole time, so I'll just take even more questions. But so one of the prompts, and I think something that also came up in the chat is really around like there are a lot of people who are transitioning between research operations and being researchers, and also being individual contributors and being leaders, right? Because
Mm,
obviously there's leaders in operations, there's leaders in research, design, product as well. And so, what are some of the ways that people can start to build their skills in the discipline as an individual contributor and then make that transition to leading teams? Because, as you mentioned,
yeah.
for the larger enterprises, there's usually more than one research ops
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So people who are
person.
research ops ICs moving into a management space.
Mhm.
Right. The thing that I have seen, and like I haven't worked in every organization in the world, is that we are pretty poorly trained just on management skills.
Mm.
Like, how do you manage people? So, what typically happens, I've certainly seen this in research, and perhaps we're starting to get a bit of this now in research ops as the field grows, is that a really good researcher or a charming researcher or a well-connected researcher, whatever, gets another researcher, and then because they do a great job, then you get another researcher, and before you know it, you've got a team of 20 or more, 120 if we go back 3 years ago. But nowhere in that have you ever really been trained as either a manager of people, which then some people just go, oh, like all I've got to do is manage people. No, you manage people and you manage your business in the organization, your busyness. You've got to manage that, which means you've got to have a strategy, you've got to have a sense of direction. And that helps you also manage your people well, because if you manage your business well, it means you don't have people who are burning out because they're trying to get too much done in the day. It also means they've got purpose and they know why they're there every day to do research on what. It doesn't mean everything's perfect all the time and everyone's like birds, ducks, and geese and My Little Pony. But it just means that you've got a way better chance of delivering a great experience for the people in your team and a really good experience for the business over time. So I feel like when we say management, I certainly made this mistake myself. I was like, well, now I've got to learn how to manage people and do annual reviews and deliver feedback, good and bad, and all these things. And that is true. And over time, I realized yeah, like as a manager, I also need to manage the business. So all the things we've been speaking about in terms of strategy, systems design, doesn't matter who you are, we all have to have systems in our lives and in our world to organize ourselves. Those are all really important skills to pick up. And then, of course, people management things and skills. For me, I was lucky enough that my husband, now husband, is an excellent people manager with a lot of experience in the pharmaceutical world. And so when I was trying to figure out how to manage people, he was coaching me behind the scenes to kind of learn how to do things. And that was very helpful. But I also did programs, courses like nonviolent communication to
Mm.
learn how do I share feedback in a way that is like people will receive it. Um, Courses like that that kind of draw around the edges of being a nice person, but also a strong person, and psychology were really helpful to me as well.
Well, actually, kind of to follow on that, I know at the beginning of the call, we talked about some of the resources that you're working on, but are there other resources that help people as they are getting started or
Mhm.
maybe even continuing down the path to developing their own research operations practice?
Yeah. Of course, there's my book, Research That Scales, and there's, as you mentioned, Jake Burkhart's book. And then also um, there is, oh, name is just suddenly escaping me. Stephanie Marsh. She's just published another book on research ops, which I reviewed and wrote a reference for. And it's my book's is sort of like big conceptual. You need to think this way. Like your nervous system needs and your brain needs to function this way to even do this work with a whole lot of practical information. And hers is very much like these are the steps, sort of like the recipe book. I'm like, here's how you organize your kitchen and cook. And Steph's book is like, here's the recipes. So they're actually quite a good compendium, those three books. I mentioned earlier Richard Rummelt's Good Research, Bad Research. No, Good, Bad Strategy, Bad Strategy. On strategy, I mentioned the Harvard Business Review. Really a good idea to get a subscription even for a month and dive into articles about, talking about people management. What are the themes? Just get curious about what the rest of the business world is thinking and doing at an academic level. They've got an excellent set of books on, they're actually on my bookshelf back there, on strategy and operating and things like that. That'll keep you busy for a decent amount of time.
Yeah, I have to say, I 100% agree with all those. And just for those who may be curious, so Jake's book is called Stop Wasting
That's
Research.
right.
And we're going to have him actually join us for a book club in early next year.
Ah,
So
fantastic. That's so
more to
cool.
come on that. I think he has a lot of really great things to say in his book. And now
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go get Stephanie's book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's such a cool thing to see now that we've gone from no books to a library of, like a little mini library of books that'll continue to grow.
In only 1 year. That's the best
I
part.
know. That is the best part. Yeah. It's boom
And
time.
it's hitting at a time that I think actually matters because, you know, and I see this very much where organizations are really running very lean.
Mm.
And so essentially what that requires is that we all get very intentional about how we spend time and use resources and plan and, how that all works.
Yeah.
And so I think, if there's only like if you have to pick one thing for people to get started with that would help them down the path from going to there's a whole lot of disparate activity happening in places and getting like organized and moving forward, I
Yeah.
guess, in an organized way.
It
What would you recommend?
it's strategy.
Yeah.
And not the idea of strategy as this like fancy pants document with the vision of the future. Not that type of strategy. I don't call it a strategy. It is a tight document of three priorities written in tweet-like style that is highly measurable. There is no hand wavy. I think, therefore I am. I'm a researcher, therefore I'm valuable.
Mm.
It must be this number of people will be doing this. And then every time, this is really what I go through in my masterclass. There's
Mm.
pre-work, and I spend time on Slack with every participant, nailing them like judo style for their priorities and going, 80% of what? Like, be careful of percentages. When you write a percentage, write it down, but then go, what is my baseline? Like, 80% is everyone's favorite made up percentage, by the way. 80% of what? Are these the most important people? I've put 100 people here, but which people? When you use the term teams, teams is rubbish. Like, yeah, we've got teams, but how many people in those teams? And which are the most important people in those teams? So Get to grips with that. Write yourself a maximum of 3 or 4 priorities. Drill them down. Spend time on it. Give yourself time out from the day-to-day work to really think through, what am I doing? What is my purpose? What does the business care about? And then everything after that will answer itself.
I love that. I love that. All right. So we're getting to the last couple of minutes, and I wanted to give you some time or space to reflect or just share on something that we may not have touched on, but you think is important for people to know.
Yeah. I say this pretty much every single AMA or podcast or anything I do because it's so important. I've mentioned the words, I've drilled that strategy is really, really key. And what I mean when I say the word strategy. But strategy requires a certain like mindset, and your nervous system needs to be set up in a certain way because strategy is about wide thinking, right? It's not necessarily about thinking like 10 years down the line with your crystal ball, but it's about seeing all the stuff going on to, you mentioned trying to figure out across the silos. But our day-to-day world with this little screen that we're all on, and Slacks and WhatsApps and emails and personal stuff, and in and out of Zoom meetings all the time, for many people, that's the day-to-day life. It doesn't allow us that space to actually think wide. We're tunnel visioned, which is very handy when you need to be tunnel visioned, but it's not handy for strategic thinking. So, in order to enable strategic thinking, you must take a week off per quarter. This will horrify some people. I did it for 4 or 5 years, and it was the only reason we actually had a living strategy. Bill Gates, he calls it Think Week. Many other CEOs will do this, and it's so valuable. This is not so that you can walk along the beach and ponder the meaning of life. What I used to do during the quarter is fill up my calendar with the things to read that were probably sitting on all of your browsers, called the read this thing that never gets read. Like, put them into your calendar. You set out your think week, and then during the quarter you're throwing things in there going, I need to like read these documents or explore the structure of the organization or think about this, and you set yourself tasks for that week so that you can enrich yourself with that really wide view of what is going on in your organization, in the wider world of research. What is this new tech? Give yourself time to do some trials, to tinker with synthetic users. You might surprise yourself. I haven't done it yet, but I've had a lot of looking at the AI moderation tools. Play, do trials. You know, that's really, really key, because you will never come up with a really good strategy that you feel like really excited to execute if you don't give yourself space to do that kind of exploration.
Yeah. And I think, I remember reading that in the book and just thinking, oh man, I don't know how you managed to get that on the calendar. And then I remembered our product team at UserTesting does this.
Ah,
And I
interesting.
wouldn't necessarily call it I don't think they call it themselves a think week, but they have something that is essentially this time where they take a step back and say, before we
Mm,
dive into the next round of work
yeah,
for the next release, let's plan. Actually, I think
yeah,
you call it planning, but yeah.
yeah. So I used to call it no meeting week. And for me, that was just a week of no meetings where I could go through all these things, read our operating reports, look at our current strategy, look at the metrics what we said we were going to do. How far are we to that? What is our burn rate on where we're getting on this, that sort of stuff. Which I couldn't, I need more than a couple of hours in the afternoon of no meetings to cultivate that mind space and get into that and really become equally intrigued again by what I'm doing, because I'm now seeing the grander vision again, the greater purpose. And I can go, oh yeah, that's it. So I'd come back all excited, and my team would be like, oh my God, she's going to be full enthusiasm.
Yes, my husband often says, I'm scared. And I should say you should be excited because it means that you've got all this energy going into what you're doing next.
Yeah. And you
So,
bring that back to your team and you re-inspire them, and you know where you're going, or you pivot. You go, whoa, that wasn't such a great idea, or we need to just tweak this. So that is my number one bit of advice that's probably surprising for some people. And it is absolutely possible. If you get sick, even twice a year, you are taking an unplanned week or two off sometimes. And so you can plan it in. And it's just, I was lucky in having a manager that allowed me to do these hacks, and then saw the results. And so allowed me to continue doing these hacks.
mm, yeah, actually, that is a very powerful point. Like if you actually see the results, then you understand the value of that time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that I will leave the conversation there and turn it back over to Christy. But thank you so much for joining me and for having this conversation, for taking questions. It has been
Leah.
lovely.
Thanks, Leah. It was an absolute pleasure. And thanks everybody for coming and hopefully we covered most of your questions on the way.